And that's the most difficult thing to do when you watch football now is who's going to be the player that comes up with the idea or does something to completely open up the space in a game.
We're assessing the runners and riders. Still a long way out, of course, from who's going to lift the Ballon d'Or, but we're going to do a little bit of a power ranking. Let's first talk about Ousmane Dembele, who was involved, of course, in the Club World Cup final. I said prior to the game that at the Club World Cup, I mean, he certainly didn't set the world alight, hadn't really necessarily changed people's opinions too much, either negatively or positively. What did you make of his performance, and did it have an impact on the Ballon d'Or rankings?
I think it could have had a positive impact in putting this award beyond a reasonable doubt. But I think now you still are making sort of semantical arguments. You're taking what is really a group of flawed candidates, flawed in a sense of, I mean, it used to be Lionel Messi would score 91 goals in a club season, and there was an unassailable argument over who's going to win the award. This now you're digging into numbers, you're comparing leagues, and you're figuring things out. I think ultimately the number of games that he played, he only started 2 games because of an injury picked up ahead of the tournament, the 2 goals and the 1 assist. It played okay, but I don't think, if let's say you had not watched the European club season, let's say you're a casual American sports fan, you put on the Club World Cup and you go, who do you think is the best player in the world after watching this tournament? I don't think anyone goes to Ousmane Dembele. So I think, again, now it comes down to the arguments of what happened over the course of the club season. I don't think any one individual player took the Club World Cup as their stage to elevate themselves to go and win the award.
This is the key thing, the calendar year, because there's so much recency bias which is involved in the Ballon d'Or, and you can obviously make a huge case for Dembele, who set the world of football alight, and I don't think you can really argue that he has been one of, if not the best player in the world since the turn into 2025. But we have to remember that earlier on in the season, wasn't he was arguing with the manager and wasn't even playing in the team. So when you look at the body of work for a lot of the other players on the list over the course of the whole season, they're making a much better case at the start of the season. Salah, for example.
Right. I think that sort of recency bias, though, is such a big part of it, because ultimately it's what is the narrative come the close of the season. And Paris Saint-Germain were the dominant team. They were the best team. They won the Champions League. They won it by a mile. And as you mentioned, that performance was a level of that kind of production that we're talking about with Messi in kind of years gone by. 28 goals, 9 assists in 36 games in the calendar year for club and country is a ludicrous return. And you mentioned that sort of falling out with Luis Enrique at parts of the year. But you can also say on the flip side that him figuring out what to do with him, playing him in at center forward and moving him around from that false 9 position to all over the pitch and creating this incredibly difficult thing to defend is largely because of his skill set and because of the work that he does defensively and how much more he's committed to that side of the game. So I think based off, if this were a second half of the season award, you would say it's unassailably Ousmane Dembele from what he produced over the course of that period. But I think looking at it in totality is when you kind of get into the nuance of it.
OK, as we stand here right now, what are the power rankings in terms of the Ballon d'Or that you've gone for?
So I believe, if I remember correctly, we're going to go from back to front. So it was actually interesting in talking about this award with Dembele, the number of PSG players you can put in this top 10. And I start with the 2 fullbacks, Nuno Mendes, who has gotten all this credit.
Fair point. Prior to the game on Sunday, I think of the top 5, only in the betting, only Yamal and Mo Salah were the players not from PSG. There were 3 PSG players in the top 5.
But Nuno Mendes has gotten all this incredible amount of credit for how he's locked down opposition wingers and how that side of the pitch is dead. I think Hakimi, maybe for me, does a little bit more going forward in the position that he takes up. You can flip those 2. You can have an argument as much as you like. I put Pedri at number 8 just because I think he had an unbelievable season in keeping that Barcelona team ticking and pushing them forward, getting back now to full fitness, and he's looking like the dynamic, most important player at times of that Barcelona side. Moving to number 7, Kylian Mbappe. I'm not the biggest fan of the season that he had. If you're talking about impact, I think you would pick other players ahead of him. But based off of raw production, it's hard not to look at the figures of even non-penalty goals over the course of the season. He did a job. I think he did a good job, but I think that's about as low as I can reasonably put him, given his level of talent and given what he actually produced. Number 6, there are times where in this award, I just want to pick who I kind of like. There is no numerical argument. I mean, it's a decent one. He played in Michael Olise is who I'm talking about. 20 goals, 23 assists, and 50 games for Bayern. This is just, when I watch Bayern, I am moved when I watch Michael Olise running down that right side and cutting inside and the effortlessness with which he plays. I just think it's wonderful to watch. I think he's a magnificent footballer. And now I think he currently is the best player on Bayern Munich. And I think going forward for the French national side, they've got to use him in a manner.
He's starting to fulfill that potential, isn't he? This was the season where I think he took a big step forward. We thought that he was going to be good. This was the season where it was like, okay, he really is good.
But I still think at times he gets treated as like the Crystal Palace player, as the player who is up and coming. But I think he's right. I think he's here. For number 5, I picked Vitinha. Even honestly, in the Club World Cup final, where PSG got hammered by 3-0 against Chelsea, there's still moments in the game where I'm going, God, Vitinha's classy. He's just, for me, the player most indicative of class in the game. I actually think if you were to pick, let's say, an heir apparent to the skill set of Luka Modric, that's your man. I think it's Vitinha. He's so good on the ball, and I think he's so important to making that team work. So I picked him as my number 5, and kind of looking at it, Lamine Yamal. You can nitpick the production, and we're going to talk about Lamine Yamal a little bit as well in the show. I think the production can certainly be one, but again, you watch the games. You watch Barcelona. He's just so brilliantly talented and does so many things to open up games. The most difficult thing to do when you watch football now is who's going to be the player that comes up with the idea or does something to completely open up the space in a game. And he does that so often for Barcelona that I think he deserves, just based on an impact. I can appreciate, I think he would be top 3. I think he would be one of the favorites if instead of scoring 9 goals in La Liga, he had scored 18, which, you know, again, is sort of an ifs, buts, and maybes. But by watching him, I think he's maybe the best footballer on the planet. But if you look at the actual season that he had, I think there were 3 players that were better. And so moving on, one of those players plays on his team, Rafinha. And I think there were moments of the season, and this is where I talked about this kind of being a flawed class. There were times of the season where he's winning this award going away. But there are other times where you watch Barcelona or he's got a run of bad production, and there just aren't players now that are as unassailable, as consistently brilliant as they were in the past. We talked about him maybe around March time, around April time as one of the best players in the world. I don't think now you could say that he deserves to win the award. I don't think he did enough for the national side. I think he had enough fallow periods, but Rafinha was brilliant. I almost picked Mo Salah as my number 1.
Before we get to the top 2, an interesting one that jumped out to me was you've got Pedri at 8 and then Yamal at 4 and Rafinha at 3.
Yeah.
Was it because of the way that Pedri goes about the game and the fact that he's not the guy who's immediately grabbing all of the headlines, but he does make that Barcelona team tick? Is this one of the fallibilities really of the Ballon d'Or, is we focus so much on goals and production going forward and kind of the sexy stuff, and players like Pedri are never going to get in that top 3 or 4 because, well, you know, they're the guys who are not really necessarily making the headlines.
I think that's fair. I think, well, first off, I do have Vitinha at number 5, but I think when you're comparing those players, I just think that what makes Barcelona special is what happens in forward positions. And Pedri is part of that, but I think the brilliance that they have shown this season is opening up opponents when it doesn't look like the openings are there. Pedri plays a role in that, but in my view, Yamal and Rafinha have played more of an important part in that. But if you want to talk about, and I hear Sid Lowe, The Guardian, does a terrific job covering Spanish football, say Pedri's the most important player in the team. And you want to make that argument, fair enough. When I watch them play, I focus on that front 3 and what they do that's so special. So I picked them. To get back to the rankings, I have Mo Salah as my number 2. I was this close to picking him as my number 1. I went through the case today, and I think what didn't happen for him was Champions League production. I just don't think he did enough in the Champions League, especially when they got knocked out. To be a last 16 team and get knocked out of the competition, yeah, you won the Premier League, but I think it would have needed to be an international tournament win or something like that to get Salah over the line. He also has a ridiculous level of production. He had 29 goals in the Premier League. 9 of them are penalties. I do dock players that score a lot of penalties, and I look at 20.
Stat padding.
Right. It's a 20-goal season that he had, in my opinion. And then Dembele as my number 1. I think of the flawed cases, we'll call them flawed cases, I think he has the best one as such an impactful player on such a brilliant team, the Club World Cup final notwithstanding, that I think he's worthy of winning the award this year.
Do you think, I know you were playing the rules here, where do we stand as of today? What have some of these guys behind him got to do at the start of next season to overtake Dembele? How far away are they?
I think the period's close. From my understanding of Ballon d'Or, it's from kind of the start of the European club season to the end of the European club season. So in my view, we're locked in. Okay. So I think at the moment, I think this is Maybe at the start of next season, because, you know, when voting happens, there's still other things that gets taken into consideration. But I think for the most part, this is locked in. Maybe if Barcelona get off to a ridiculous start or whatever. But beginning of seasons are not where we really judge this. No. So in my view, I think this, you have to look at it on the merits of what we've seen over the last 12 months. And in my view, Dembele is number one.